It's a great privilege and honor for me to welcome Ben Connelly.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you. Thank you, Dean. It's really nice to be here. You know, I've come to visit. I live in Minneapolis, and I'm based at the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center. And Dean was one of the first people to invite me to come and teach, to travel and teach. And I've developed relationships here, and it just feels warm and wonderful to be welcomed here. And Crooked River, if you like sitting down and just being quiet, Crooked River Zen Center is a great place to hang out. Also, if you don't like sitting down and being quiet, it's probably even better. Because it can make a context where you can learn to just slow down, to have some opportunities to let go of how frantic our minds and our hearts can get. So I'm just happy to be here. And I'm going to leap into the material of the talk for tonight. No, I'm not. That's right. We're going to meditate. Hello. I just got here. I think it would be nice to practice meditation for a little bit before I talk about mindfulness and intimacy. So there are probably some people here who have been practicing meditation for years and years and years. There may be some people for whom this is very new. So I'm going to provide some really basic guidance in how to do this, and then we can just sit quietly for a few minutes. So most of what I'll be talking about is just the body and relating to the body. So if there's something that I'm suggesting that you do with your body that doesn't seem like a good thing to do with your body, then don't do it. So you always want to trust your own sense of who you are and how your body is. So that's my invitation. So I just invite you to bring your butt to the back of your chair. Find your feet flat on the floor. If you like, you can bring the hands into what's called a mudra. So that'd be left fingers resting and right, thumb tips touching. You could just let the hands rest in the lap or on the thighs if you prefer, allowing the gaze to turn down. So you're looking perhaps at the shoulders of the person in front of you, or at the floor, maybe 5 or 10 feet in front of you. By the way, if at some point you can't hear me, please just raise your hand up by your ears, and I will be able to tell what you are trying to communicate to me. So, I'll just be teaching posture and breath here. I invite you to first bring your attention to the physical sensations in the soles of the feet. And then moving the attention to the parts of the body that are supported by the chair, where you can feel pressure of the chair or the cushion against the body. I'll teach posture in 3 points this evening. This first point, groundedness. So at any point in your life, if you would like to feel more grounded, less agitated, less scattered, one of the simplest and most effective things you can do is bring your attention to the physical sensations where you are actually in contact with and supported by the ground. So this is a matter of recognizing that you are always grounded. So having checked in with groundedness, I invite you to bring the attention to the physical sensations along the spine. And now, just extend, find a little more length and openness, letting the body be long, tall, letting the heart open up and forward a little bit. Allowing energizing and expanding along the spine to release tension. Well, the second point of posture, uprightness, brings energy into the practice. It's also a way of recognizing and embodying our inherent dignity and nobility. Any time in your life, if you feel powerless, despairing, frustrated, victimized, one of the most effective ways that you can respond to these feelings and related thoughts is to energize the posture and allow the body to demonstrate to you that you always have power, agency, and dignity. Now, having checked in with groundedness and uprightness, I just invite you to relax. The third point of posture I'll teach is relaxation. Allowing the body to relax around your groundedness and strength. Letting the shoulders hang down. Allowing any holding that doesn't need to be there to release. And now, let's allow the attention to begin to rest in the sensations of breathing. Mindfulness of breathing is the foundation of mindfulness. Noticing the physical sensations in the lower abdomen as we breathe. So there is nothing here that we need to think of as distraction or distractedness. At any moment, if you recognize that you're not aware of the breath and the posture, that is very wonderful, because you have recognized awareness, and in that moment, you can just bring the awareness in to your own body, into the breath, cultivating awareness of intimacy with the body. And as we're sitting here, there will be sensations in the body. There will be sounds. There will be thoughts. There will be visual images, whether the eyes are open or closed. There may be emotions or feelings. There may be smells or tastes. We don't need to do anything to any of these phenomena. There is no need to fix, judge, name, or control any of it. So let's just sit quietly for a couple of minutes here. I invite you to allow this intimacy with your body and your breath to be a way to be intimate with all of who you are and of what's happening right now. Just notice this breath. The body as it is right now. Allow the eyes to open and start to move around. And you can just start to move the body in whatever way seems beneficial to you. Adjust the posture. Have a stretch if you like. I used to really like to go see Chicago blues bands, and they would, the band would come out before the headliner, the name person on the bill, and the band would, like throughout the first couple songs and in between them, they'd be like, "Are you ready? Are you ready for James Cotton, the king of the blues harmonica?" And you'd be like, "Yeah." And they'd be like, "I can't hear you." And I'm like, man, what I do at these things is so backwards. I was like, come here, I'm like, let's see how chill you can possibly get. But the practice of mindfulness, although it is often very relaxing, so people may have fallen asleep while we're doing this. It's actually very common, or feel very common thing. But mindfulness is not a relaxation technique, and relaxation is a byproduct of the practice. That's not by any means the goal. It's actually, mindfulness is about attention. It's about energy. So it's not like you're doing it wrong if you're relaxed, nor is it like you're doing it wrong if you're really wound up. The idea is to just know that you're relaxed or you're wound up. It's all welcome. So anyway, I'm wandering around the country talking about mindfulness and intimacy. And I know you might think, oh, this guy just wants to talk about mindfulness and intimacy because he wrote a book about it, which is kind of true, but I actually wrote a book called Mindfulness and Intimacy because I wanted to talk about mindfulness and intimacy. So my favorite thing is to be with people, and I like teaching like this, but also just having conversations about the things that I value. And mindfulness and intimacy are two things that I really value. I think that bringing our attention to them and thinking about them and making them a part of how we look at our lives can transform our lives and can transform the lives of the people around us and the world in ways that we can't even know. So I'm going to just begin this little talk part by reading briefly just the first paragraph of the chapter on mindfulness and the first paragraph on the chapter of intimacy to give you a sense of how I'm talking about and thinking about these two words. Mindfulness is being aware of things in the present moment in a way that promotes well-being. To practice mindfulness is to choose some aspect of our experience and focus attention there in a sustained way. There is discernment in mindfulness, but it is non-judgmental. It is kind. It allows the mind to rest in the phenomena of the present moment and take a break from creating a relentless stream of imaginations about the future, reviews of the past, or judgments of the present. Our awareness is one of the most amazing and powerful things we have as human beings. Rather than taking it for granted and allowing it to focus wherever the mind's habits choose, with mindfulness we can better focus awareness on things that are truly beneficial. Intimacy, in its simplest definition, means close familiarity and friendship. Words, however, have power and meaning beyond their definitions. No matter what the dictionary says, some words evoke very different meanings or feelings to different people. To some folks, the word religion evokes inspiration, warmth, and wonder. To others, constriction and closed-mindedness. I find that in Buddhist circles, you have both these kind of people sitting right next to each other all the time. Interesting phenomenon. Intimacy is a word a bit like this. It can evoke feelings of connection and safety, but for some people it's pretty scary or stickily sentimental. And then there are the folks who think it just means sex. This talk will be very disappointing to you if that's what you think. Here I will be pointing towards a way of understanding and experiencing the word intimacy that fosters compassion, calm, and joyful action. I use intimacy here as we often use it in Zen discourse. It's about harmony between autonomy and interdependence. In intimacy, we are individuals who are connected, and we are also one undivided whole. We can develop both healthy boundaries and healthy boundarylessness. So the way I talk about mindfulness is pretty conventional. The way I talk about mindfulness is based in study and practice with the earliest texts on mindfulness from the earliest layer of Buddhist teachings, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutra, the Mindfulness Breathing Sutra, and commentarial literature. And so I've studied these and I practiced the practices that come from them and practiced with people who have been parts of lineal transmission for thousands of years doing these practices. So it's pretty conventional. The way I talk about intimacy is probably less conventional. The way I talk about intimacy is very conventional if you hang out at Zen centers all the time. So I basically use intimacy in the way it is commonly used in Zen discourse. But that's a little different than the way most of us use it. So Zen is part of what's called the Mahayana Buddhist tradition. And really one of the key hallmarks of Mahayana Buddhism is the idea that each thing is entirely dependent on everything else, and that everything is dependent on each thing, and each thing is dependent on every other thing. But that may sound a little abstract, I'm aware. It's like a math problem. So Maya Angelou once wrote, "You are the sum total of everything you've seen, heard, smelled, tasted, been told, and forgot. It's all there." So she's just pointing out that every part of our lives arrives in each moment. It's all still here. But from the perspective of Mahayana Buddhism, this way she frames it is way too small. So the conditions that produce any moment of how we are, or any moment of anything that we perceive, go, as the Buddha generally puts it, are without discoverable beginning. The conditions that produce anything are without discoverable beginning. He doesn't say they're infinite because he doesn't claim to see the beginning of time. He just says you can't find the beginning of the conditions that produce anything. So another angle for thinking about this would be Carl Sagan, the physicist, once said, if you would like to bake an apple pie from scratch, first you must invent the entire universe. That is to say, if you're like, I can get kind of proud, I made dinner from scratch, it feels good, I don't bake, but let's pretend I was going to bake a pie. And I'd be like, I feel pretty good. And then someone else is like, well, you didn't make that from scratch. And then I'd be like, well, actually, I grew the apples in my orchard, and I grew the wheat in my yard. So I feel pretty impressive. But it's like, okay, cool, well, did you invent the cultivation of apples in Sumeria 6,000 years ago? Well, actually, I didn't do that. Were you there for the formation of the first human cultures that led to that development? Were you there for the coming together of single-celled organisms that led to, so you can do this process through, if you like philosophy, we'll call it a reductio ad absurdum. But if you don't like philosophy, you can just pretend I didn't say that. So if you want to pick anything out of your experience right now, like say this spot on the wall that you see, you could begin to list things on which it depends, and you could list things, if you're creative and diligent about it, until the end of your life. And then perhaps if maybe you have infinite life and you go to heaven, you could list those things until the end of time, and you would still not reach the end of the things on which any phenomena of just this moment depends. This is true for everything. Everything depends on infinite conditions. So this means everything we are comes from everything. It also means that what we do always matters infinitely. Every single moment what you do is having infinite impact. We tend to think we only see this tiny corner of our impacts and we believe that's all it is. But it can't be true. It goes forever. So we're completely supported, we're completely connected. Everything we do always matters. So the thing is, I can't think of anything more intimate than everything being entirely dependent on each other all the time. That is to say, intimacy is the nature of reality. The nature of reality is interdependence, and the nature of reality is intimacy, because to be so dependent is to be intimate, to be as close as anything could possibly be. So the basic premise with which I'm teaching here this evening is that intimacy is how reality is, and sometimes we're somewhat aware of that, and a lot of times we're not. Generally speaking, we feel pretty alienated. We feel like there's like us and we're separate from everything, and then there's a bunch of stuff that we want to judge, figure out, and control. That's how human consciousness is conditioned to experience the world. But there is another way. There is another way to begin to actively recognize our intimacy, which can transform how we act. So, one of the reasons I want to talk about mindfulness and intimacy and pair these ideas is because we live in the time of the mindfulness movement. Oh, yes. People call it the mindfulness. You can call it whatever you want. I call it, when you go to the grocery store, you will see a Time magazine mindfulness insert on the stand at the magazine rack. That wasn't happening 10 years ago. Also, you couldn't find the In Shape magazine Rock Hard Mindful Abs article, which probably doesn't really exist, but we're not that far away. I'm really interested in wellness, and I read a lot of articles about wellness. This is just a made-up number, but I think a third of the articles I read will mention that, and it would be good to do meditation or practice mindfulness, or they'll describe something that you should do that would be good for you that is mindfulness, but they don't use the word mindfulness for it. Mindfulness just being using your attention or training your attention to pay attention in a way that's beneficial. So it's just like a cultural phenomenon that's happening. And I hope it's beneficial. I have found the practice of mindfulness to be really, really transformative in my own life and in the lives of other people. And so I'm into it. I provide secular mindfulness training. So like I'm a religious person. I'm a member of the clergy as a Soto Zen priest, but I also function as a secular mindfulness teacher in a variety of contexts, mostly with police and people in addiction recovery. So I hope that's beneficial. But, there are things about the way mindfulness is being appropriated into American culture that are really important that we look at closely and maybe try and counter. So for one thing, mindfulness starts to look in this culture, our very highly individualistic culture, as like a self-improvement methodology, a way to improve yourself. And maybe this will be a kind of a freaky thing, but the purpose of mindfulness originally in Buddhist teachings was to help you see through the illusion that you have a self that's separate from other things. That is to say, the purpose of mindfulness is that you look at all the stuff you think is yourself, realize none of it's separate, so you can realize your intimacy with everything. And you can be free of your alienation. So it's not really intended to be about self-improvement, about something much bigger, about liberating people from suffering by helping to not be bound into these little shells that feel so separate and cut off. So another thing about the mindfulness movement is like, I teach at these halfway houses quite a bit. I personally am in recovery from addiction and alcoholism, so that's a place where I have experience that I can connect with people. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I already do this. And I'm like, great. And they're like, yeah, I have my app, or I just watch my YouTube video. And it's good. I mean, it's helping them. It's cool. But mindfulness was never intended to be something that you did mostly alone. There's time for practicing on your own, but mindfulness is embedded in the idea of community, communal practice. In Buddhist terms, we call it Sangha. In modern terms, I'll use the language of Audre Lorde, the great womanist poet and essayist who wrote, "Without community, there is no liberation. Without community, there is no liberation." From a Mahayana Buddhist perspective, even if you become completely free of all your painful emotional habituation through mindfulness, if that is not something that is part of liberating everyone from suffering, all you're doing is basking in the delusion of your aloneness and missing the fact that you're in intimacy with the world and you have an opportunity to be liberated together. I should say that Audre Lorde goes on. She says, without community, there is no liberation. Without community, there is no liberation. But community must not mean a shedding of our differences, nor the pretense that those differences do not exist. So this relates to what I was saying earlier when I said we help practice healthy boundaries and healthy boundarylessness. We have identities that are distinct, and we live from different places in the world, and yet we're connected. Those things don't have to fall apart. It's dangerous to say we're all one. It's dangerous because someone doesn't feel like part of your oneness, and then you are ignoring their truth. So another thing about the mindfulness movement is that, I get hired to go to agencies and teach this stuff, so I'm not saying like people shouldn't do that. But we do have a thing where it's like, does anyone have like a job where you have to go to mindfulness training? No, okay, maybe it's more in Minnesota. They have some of this in Minnesota. They make people listen to me, I'll tell you that. Poor souls. But anyway, you can see some of these training programs. You go in, and basically like, you got your big corporation. Google has a huge mindfulness program. And they're like, well, we want more productivity. I hope you're already getting hives. But anyway, so we want more productivity. So we're going to get this mindfulness training, and we're going to train people to just do this practice, and this practice will help them to just accept everything exactly how it is. I have no interest in helping people accept everything exactly how it is. I don't. The conditions in which we live are systemically massively harmful. So we live in a country that is and has always been characterized by white supremacy and patriarchy. We have Islamophobia and anti-Semitism that are on the rise. Homophobia and transphobia are endemic. People are profoundly harmed. And we have a way of producing and consuming goods that is destroying our family. Hundreds of species going extinct. Human beings losing their homes. So the idea that we're going to just be like, oh, we'll just take this little piece of Buddhism that says you should just chill out and accept everything is not going to help people. I want everyone to be free. The basic vow and idea of Mahayana Buddhism, it's called Mahayana because it's a great vehicle. It's a great vehicle because it's a vehicle big enough to get every single person to liberation. That's the idea. And that's a big project. I know. But basically, what I teach is intended to be a way to free people so their energy can flow towards universal liberation. Because when I say that, like you say, oh, you're just going to free everyone from suffering, some part of me goes, oh, that just looks like way too big of a job. Way too big of a job. So we have practices that help us to have our energy naturally flow to it. So we don't like run around, you're like, I'm doing my good works. And then you're like, oh my God, I just got to lie on the couch and drink beer and watch TV. Because you're burned out. So that's not the only way this can work. Your energy, that part of you that wants everyone to be well, can be freed. Can be freed through practice. This mode of thinking about practice is like mindfulness and intimacy paired. Is not something I came up with. It's a way of expressing the teachings of my favorite Buddhist teacher. His name's Vasubandhu. He was part of a movement called Yogacara, which is very old, but is still alive because we're doing it right now. How cool is that? Yogacara basically, this says a lot of things, but in terms of this talk, he says mindfulness is very effective at helping people shed habits of afflictive emotions. So So everybody has the habit of feeling painful emotional states. And we're all a little bit different. Some people tend to be more anxious, some more despairing, some more angry. But we're like this, and it's hard. And not only do we suffer because of it, but we cause suffering. And it's just part of humanity. But mindfulness, they say, is really, really effective at helping people shed these kind of habits. So this is why I say I'm not promoting acceptance. Mindfulness promotes non-reactivity. So you don't have to accept that the system you're involved in and intimate with is really harmful. You can just be like, I'm not reactive to it, so I have a lot of energy to do something beneficial. That's possible. Anyway, so mindfulness is really good for healing patterns of emotional reactivity. Intimacy is really good for waking us up to the fact that we're always connected, so that we don't get in this kind of narrow, alienated experience of our lives, and we open up and become more free. So people's capacity to realize intimacy is pretty various. So when I say realize intimacy, I mean recognize and feel connected. So just sometimes you're going to feel more connected and sometimes less connected. One of the simplest tests I can say is if your mind is very focused on controlling outcomes, that's a sign that you're a long way from intimacy. Intimacy can never be about control. But in general, you may have thought about this or not, but if you start to investigate your experience, you'll be like, sometimes you feel connected and sometimes you feel more cut off. And this is really worth knowing what's going on with you, because it really matters. It affects how we feel and it affects how we treat people and how we conduct our lives. And that will affect other people in many ways. So we're various. So I'll give some examples. I love to go where my environment is made up of things that were not made for or by people. So what would normally be called like nature, would be how people put it. So like I'm like almost a 4-week teaching tour right now, driving around the country, and I have a couple nights off coming up in a few days, and I'm just like looking at a map. I know what I'm going to do is go straight into the woods in the Appalachians and camp, and that context will be one where I will feel, my experience, I don't know what will happen, but generally speaking, when I get out into the woods, I just start to feel supported, connected, my mind quiets down, my energy flows more naturally, I feel like I'm operating more harmoniously with the world. It feels right. I feel that intimacy. It's very natural for me. That was cool. And this is pretty common. I've met many, many people who are like, well, I'm spiritual, but not religious. That's like the 21st century American motto. And then they'll say like, nature is my church. I've heard many people say that. Nature is my church, or the woods are my church. That's cool. But this is not true for everyone. When I given this talk on this material back at my home Zen center, and I got done, and a buddy came up and he said, nature? I don't think nature's all that great. I don't feel all connected in nature. It's like dirty. And so not everyone is the same. Really, not everyone is the same. Or another example would be family. Family. Some people are like, where I really feel intimacy deeply is in family. I get together with the people in my family and I just feel so supported. And I feel so connected. And I feel like my energy naturally flows to support them, and it's just harmonious, and it feels so good. I was in Santa Barbara talking about this a couple months ago, and someone just yelled in the back, "That's not really possible!" Couldn't even believe that it was possible. But I've talked to people for whom that is true, and I've talked to people for whom family is a locus of terrible pain and alienation. And people everywhere in between. So we're different. The basic idea of what I'm teaching, like with this book, is that our tendencies around intimacy are not, they're malleable. The basic premise of Buddhism is that there's suffering in the world and you can do something about it. And that one of the most powerful things you can do is transform the way you experience it. And that you can train the mind You can train yourself so that you can be more free and that you can be more beneficial. And one of the ways we can do this is recognize where we tend to feel intimate and build on that, and then recognize where we tend to feel really not intimate and try and grow into feeling connection in those places. Many practices are about this. So, we got some purple in here. This is good. For the segue, because what you guys were expecting, since I'm from Minnesota, that I was going to talk about Prince, right? I'm sure you saw that coming. Prince. If you watch Prince play music, this is probably not a universal experience, but many people I know, including me, watch Prince play music and perform, and you would just have this sense of the person disappearing into the act of singing, dancing, exhorting the audience, playing guitar. The whole thing was just this pure diving into experience that produced this kind of spiritual phenomenon of connection. And this is like a very Zen, Prince was a very Zen guy. Actually, I don't think that's true. He was actually a Jehovah's Witness, by the way. Used to door knock in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. People would like go to their door and it'd be Prince. Wow. I almost moved to the western suburbs just to have that experience. Anyway, but when he would play music, there was this intense absorption. And this is like very characteristic of the way we teach Zen practice. To do simple, whatever you're doing, we tend to emphasize simple things rather than playing awesome guitar solos, but with your whole being. That any activity can be the activity of pouring your whole self into what you're doing. So sweeping, cooking. I think one of the members of Crooked River Zen is cooking food so that we can eat it tomorrow at the retreat we have together. And that activity is one of giving to the community, but also I'll bet he recognizes that just pouring himself into that cooking is Zen practice. It's complete. So anyway, Prince, dive into this. And I think other people would see this happening and hear this happening and experience it, and they would feel called into this sense of connection. And you'd see like 20,000 people in a room having this profound experience of coming together. And everyone would be like, purple rain. Wow, they're just opening up, and no one knows what purple rain is. I think it's actually one of the reasons the song is so powerful and spiritual is it doesn't point to something you can get or grasp or no, it's something mysterious. And yet people would feel it. So a person, in this case Prince, can not only immerse themselves in activity and recognize intimacy, but they can help other people to recognize it and bring other people into that sphere of connection. And everybody does this. You do this. I'm confident. I have total confidence that there are times when you are feeling more connected and you're with people and you help them to experience that. It's a natural human proclivity. But it is something we can build on and develop. And it is my opinion that at the fundament, at the root, a Buddhist teacher's function is to do this, to realize that they're entirely dependent on the universe, that their actions always matter infinitely, and to help other people to recognize that intimacy together. But another part of the story with Prince is that he died alone in an elevator of a drug overdose at the age, I think, of 58. Which, to me, is very sad. And it shows something that is not abnormal. That people can have really amazing and wonderful capacities to realize intimacy and help other people to connect, and also be profoundly wounded and doing things that are really harmful. Many people have like kind of extreme polarities, but everybody has this to some degree. There's places where you're like, really, you just flow, and there's other places where you're like, did I really just do that again? You know, I was talking to my buddy, and he's like, my marriage is going great, but every time we get in the car, we just start yelling. You know, we're like this. We're like this. So I think sometimes you kind of get this idea from some Buddhist literature that is kind of like you're just going to realize intimacy, and then it's like you're all done. That has not been what I've seen with my own eyes. The path of liberation is it's a path. It's a path. So one of the reasons I talk about this is that it's not uncommon for Buddhist teachers to be really amazing at recognizing interdependence, recognizing intimacy, and helping other people to do so, and to also be very wounded and engaging in harmful activities. So in the United States, we have a high level of awareness of this, which I would say we can largely thank the feminist movement in particular for saying we're going to stop ignoring abuses of power, particularly by men. But anyway, many, many Buddhist teachers in the United States, we know, have engaged in harmful activities. Teachers who are beloved and have helped people have amazing experiences and transformations. We could just list and list. And their students will be like, well, they completely helped me transform my life and become free and help people, and also they did these really harmful things. And I used to be like, that doesn't make any sense. And now I'm like, no, it makes total sense. Human beings are like this. But that doesn't mean we have to just accept it. The process of making Buddhism in the United States, where this can be happening less, I don't know if we can ever have it happening never. I think it will involve many different kinds of things. Lots of people are doing a lot of different things, including me. But one of the things we can do is make sure that we're using mindfulness in our communities. Some schools of Buddhism, particularly Zen, emphasize the intimacy side. It's like always just jump into your activity and immediately recognize that you're already intimate with the universe. You don't even have to do anything because you already are intimate. You're free. Why wait to be free when you're already free? Why are you working so hard? You're free. And it's like, wow, sometimes you'll receive that message and you might even feel it for a second, fleetingly. But the problem is that if you de-emphasize the psychological tools of early Buddhism, particularly the one of mindfulness, you're missing something that's very helpful, because as a teacher, I need to be able to go, wait a minute, I have this particular emotional phenomena occurring in me, and I need to take care of it here. And not just be like, oh, it's just part of the vast universe. Sometimes I have to boundary myself. So I'm going to do just a couple more readings out of this book, and then maybe see if other people want to say anything. So I want to read a little section. This book, Mindfulness and Intimacy, is it's divided into chapters that are just about parts of our regular lives, like body, mind, heart, work, play, family, community, teachers, stuff like that. And each chapter is just about how we can cultivate mindfulness and realize intimacy in that particular aspect of our lives. So this is a chapter called Heart. Have you ever seen someone laughing in the rain? Or someone stoop-shouldered, shuffling along on a green and sunny day? Perhaps in a time of crisis, you've seen someone respond with resolve and energy, and someone else collapse into fear or despair. Maybe someone you know gets testy, and then you know it's best to leave them alone. When a loved one is dying, sometimes people are overwhelmed with pain and can barely take care of their basic needs. And sometimes they leap into frantic action to avoid their feelings. And at other times, they only know one thing: profound, all-encompassing acceptance and love. I've seen all this in others and in myself as well. One of the clearest insights of my years of meditation is how powerfully my emotions color my experience, my perception of the world. So, Buddhism is basically a way of alleviating suffering. There's suffering in the world and you can do something about it. So I think it's going to end up mattering how you feel. That's going to have to be a part of the process. Pretty simple. So generally speaking, when a person has a feeling, in my experience, they don't know the feeling state itself. They don't feel the emotion. They listen to a little chattery voice about something outside of themselves that they think is the problem. So like when I'm anxious, I'm just like, oh my gosh, am I going to get the thing or not get the thing? Are the people going to be mean or are they going to be nice? Blah, 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 blah. And I'm not like really deeply knowing what it feels like to be anxious. I'm just like, bah, 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 and I'm like up here in my head. I think this is pretty common. Another way to put this maybe more simply is when people are angry, they pretty rarely deeply know what it is to feel anger. Mostly they just know that someone else is a dick. So this is like our mind is conditioned to ignore how we feel and focus on projecting and objectifying because we're conditioned to think that our happiness will be promoted by manipulating external objects. That's like how both cultural and I think other elements of conditioning have produced our experience of the world. But it's not the only way to experience the world. And one of the most powerful things you can do if you want to be free from suffering and you want other people to be free from suffering is to learn how to be directly aware of your feeling states themselves. Not ideas about the feeling states, but just feel how you feel. So in practical terms, this is not complicated. It's just like you can go through your day and every once in a while just be like, how do I feel? And then just notice. It's really pretty simple. But this can be developed if you're doing formal meditation practice just by being sensitive to how you feel as it ebbs and flows. What is not going to be easy to do, it may not be possible, is to sustain mindful attention on your feeling states like you would your breath. Because feelings are very amorphous and mysterious. When you look at them, you'll be like, okay, I feel this way. And then you'll be like, but where is it? Where did it go? And then you have to start thinking about it. And that's not the same thing as being mindful of it. That's just thinking about it. So you just want to, it's like the comparison I make is for mindfulness of emotions is like, if you ever had like a 13-year-old or 14-year-old person in your family, for most people of that age, the best way to talk to them about how they feel and how they're doing is not say, let's sit down and talk. How are you feeling? Especially maybe just me, because I had boys. It didn't work. But sometimes when we were like in the dark, maybe in a car, not looking directly at each other, I could bring something up and they would be willing to reveal something to me. So the same thing is true with mindfulness of emotional states. If you try and just be like, now I'm looking at you, it doesn't tend to work very well. So you just kind of go, hey, how are you? Hey, how are you? And it'll be like, okay, I'll show you. And you begin to be able to see it. So this relates, I'm going to give you a little Buddhist karma theory, because I know that's what you're like, what I want. It's Friday night. It's karma theory night. Anyway, so this will be brief. Anybody who read Thich Nhat Hanh, you'll be like, this is what Thich Nhat Hanh is talking about all the time, because Thich Nhat Hanh is kind of a Yogacara teacher. Anyway, so let's see. Basically, when an emotional state occurs, then a seed is planted in consciousness. And unless that emotional state is directly seen, actually a better way to put this is, when an emotional state occurs, if that emotional state is not directly seen mindfully, it will plant a seed. The seed it plants is of a similar emotional state. And that similar emotional state will recur. That seed will bear fruit. So if an emotional state occurs and it is not seen mindfully, it will plant a seed in consciousness, and a similar emotional state will occur later. That emotional state, according to Buddhist karma theory, may occur in the next few seconds. It might occur in a few hours. It might occur in a few months, a few years. It might occur 700 lifetimes from now. So just like he says, our conditioning is without discoverable beginning, the impact of our emotional reality is without discoverable end. The idea is to let go of trying to control how we are and recognize that what is occurring within us always matters. It may not matter to us in the end, It's going to matter. And that can wake us up to caring. Anyway, so the thing is, like say I'm anxious, normally I'm just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen, blah, 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 blah. I'm not seeing the feelings. And so down here, the feeling states are just planting seed after seed after seed. And I'm more likely to be anxious later in my life. Other people are more likely to be anxious because I'll be like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Oh my God. You know, and this goes out into the world. On the other hand, if a seed bears fruit, for example, a seed, I'll go with anxiety, a little fear comes up, and it's seen mindful, it bears fruit, but because the fruit is seen, it doesn't plant another similar seed. But what is planted is the seed of how you choose to react, which is with awareness, with compassionate awareness. Because if you're willing to just be there with how you feel, that is inherently compassionate. Because the meaning of the word compassion is with suffering. So if you can practice just being mindful of directly with your own difficult emotional states, whatever needed to be seen from your past gets seen, and instead of planting similar seeds, so you'll keep having those same kind of feelings you've been having your whole life, instead you plant seeds of compassionate awareness. And you don't know when those will show up. I guarantee, because you'll be like, I meditated every day last week and I'm bonkers. Everybody who's meditated a lot knows this. It's not in control of your mind. But what you did still matters. It will have impact. Someone will reap the fruit of your willingness to be compassionate with your own suffering. Oh, can't resist bringing Audre Lorde in or back. Can't remember if I quoted Audre Lorde before. Audre Lorde says, the quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has a direct bearing on the product which we live and upon the changes which we hope to bring about through those lives. The quality of light by which we scrutinize our lives has a direct bearing on the product which we live and upon the changes that we hope to bring about through those lives. So she's just summing up what I just said. The way we look at our own experience is going to have a profound impact on whatever comes out of our lives. The quality of light. Mindfulness has a what? That is to say, we start with mindfulness of breath, and then we cultivate mindfulness of emotions. But mindfulness has a quality, which is of just compassionate, non-controlling awareness. You don't have to do anything to the breath. You don't have to do anything to the body. You don't have to do anything to your feelings. You can just be there for them. It's possible. So I'm going to do one more reading. This is from the chapter called Teachers. My selection of this for these readings is basically based on the fact that it's about someone that I really love and admire. So Tomoe Katagiri was the first person to transmit and teach the sewing of Zen Buddhist robes in the United States. So for you who are not Soto Zen nerds, let me just explain a little bit. Sewing robes as a part of your practice is a beautiful way of immersing yourself in activity and giving yourself wholly to the moment. And there are many people in the United States, their main expression of Buddhist practice is sewing. And one of the main reasons is that Tomoe taught and transmitted people to do this. Many other people have done so, but she was, I believe, the first. Tomoe is now quite old and quite wonderful. Her husband died about 25 years ago, but he was the founder of the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, and I am in the Katagiri lineage, so I'm in his transmission line of priests. And she taught sewing for people in our community and all over the country for many years, but now she can't see well enough to sew, so she has retired from that activity. Anyway, Tomoe Katagiri taught me well, mostly by staying by my side and quietly pouring her energy into what we were doing together. Tomoe-san helped bring the art of sewing Zen monks' robes from Japan to the United States, and she was my teacher in sewing the robes that symbolized my ordination. She gave me precise instruction on the technical aspects of sewing, with which I am far from adept. I failed to mention that I'm terrible at sewing and I don't like it at all. and I only do the amount that I'm absolutely required to do. So I like extol the virtues of all the sewing people and love Tomoe, but I'm like, oh God, it's hard for me. They're so small. So just to give you a little framing. Anyway, to me, Tomoe's real teaching lay in her embodiment of patience, attention to the present moment, and quiet, warm intimacy. It was not uncommon, as we worked side by side, for us to be silent for an hour at a time to support wholehearted focus on each stitch. After the entire robe is sewn, which took me about a year, it is carefully ironed and folded precisely, like origami, ironed and folded. I frequently found the sewing process frustrating, but she just calmly stitched away beside me. I recall the moment when I finished the final stitch, a moment I had been waiting for. I said, Tomoe, I finished the robe. I was ready for a birthday cake, or maybe some fireworks. She put down her sewing and moved to stand up, and she said, I'll turn on the iron. I don't think she was consciously teaching me, but she brought me right back to what was in front of me. She modeled not living for some other time when the current task, the current manifestation of life is done. She hadn't been waiting for me to finish, and she realized nothing is ever really finished. Life goes on. All things connect. She took care of the world by focusing on the life at hand, and that was teaching enough for me. So this is the way of practice that I invite you to jump into, that you can make every moment of activity one where you give yourself to it because you want everyone to be free from suffering. And you might be like, well, I don't know how it's going to work. How can like giving myself to eating this food be for freeing everyone from suffering? But if you take this into your heart, it will transform things. It changes things. The way we frame and think about things changes them. And this really helps because, like, if you're like me, there's things you really care about. I hang out with addicts and alcoholics, and some of them get way better, and it's wonderful. But some of them don't. Many of them have died. And as long as I'm trying to fixate on, like, trying to control the outcome, I will burn out. I can't keep doing that work. If you want a country where we don't have all this patriarchy and whiteness concentrated at the top, you're going to get really frustrated. It's hard. But that doesn't mean you can't keep going, because you're going to realize once that work is done, there's going to be something else that's hard. And we want people to keep going. The path of liberation that Buddhism offers is vast. And so we can begin to find a way where instead of focusing on outcomes, we just keep pouring our energy into what will be best for the world. And that's enough. That can be a full life. I want things to change, but I just recognize that most of the things that I want to change aren't in my power. But that doesn't mean I stop working. So this is the kind of life that I hope people can have. One oriented towards the liberation of everyone, where you don't have to be bound. You can be free within your capacity to do that work. And if you're like, dude, theme is too big, I just came here because my heart is totally broken. Well, take care of your heart. That's the whole world. That's the whole world. That's enough. So thank you all very much.
Places, in workplaces and stuff, and what was frustrating to me was that the article wasn't addressing true mindfulness. It was addressing the commercialized mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So when my friend, she didn't really have, she hasn't practiced mindfulness or been exposed to that, and so I told her, I was like, there's other ways to practice it. They're focusing on one form, but the fact that the article didn't bring up the true component just was kind of baffling to me that they were just putting down it in general, but not looking kind of underneath that, like, well, is this what it even is? And so I'm just happy that that's discussed.
Yeah, there's all kinds of backlash articles, and that many of them seem very one-sided, as do, there are other articles that be like, mindfulness is perfect and it makes everything. I don't think it's perfect. I think it's pretty good, but there's lots of ways to improve human welfare. But yeah, those articles, it does get frustrating, so I try and stay current, but not get wrapped up in it. And obviously I'm trying to engage in discourse about making a mindfulness movement that can actually be beneficial. That's my interest. Yeah.
So I guess on that note, one thing I noticed that in a lot of these articles, they never use the word compassion. So do you think it's possible to be mindful and not develop compassion?
Probably. There's no science on this. So one thing I can say is mindfulness in its most technical expression, the language around it in early Buddhist literature doesn't have anything to do with compassion. But it does say you should be practicing to be deeply and directly aware without any manipulation of painful emotional states, which I think is inherently compassionate. So they don't use that language, but it's there. But the other thing is, the early Buddhism from which mindfulness derives emphasizes dispassion. Mahayana Buddhism, from which interdependence and intimacy become the central features, emphasizes compassion. So early Buddhism, really the model is that you use mindfulness and there's a separation. So mindfulness makes an object. You pick a thing to look at as an object separate from yourself, which is useful, but it has limitations. Mahayana Buddhism wants to say you should radically leap into relationship and get closer to the pain. That's compassion. So they're just different flavors. There's lots of ways to talk about it, but you could definitely go somewhere and learn to be good at following your breath and not get much more compassionate. I think that's possible. But the truth is, I think even if people just do the most basic kind of lame mindfulness, it's probably helping a little bit. But there's just so much more that it could be. There's so much more it could be. Yeah.
I would love to hear more about your work with addicts and what it is that you, some of the work you do as far as meditation, working with people who have addiction.
It's pretty similar to what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
So I emphasize mindfulness of emotions and opening up into deeper relationality. And a lot of this is because that's actually what people already are doing, within addiction communities, but it's to make it more an active focus and help them get deeper with it. But there's a great thinker, there's someone, I think it's a TED Talk or something, this guy's the opposite of addiction is connection. And that really rings true to my experience. Addiction is a place of profound alienation. Yeah. So, yeah. I will say one other thing that's a theme of this book that I usually leave out, but is kind of useful, is there are a lot of things that kind of, they mimic intimacy for us, or they help us feel kind of intimate. So addiction is one of those things. So when you use a bunch of drugs, sometimes your sense of self will fall away. You'll feel, this great connection, or you feel all that alienation kind of falls away. You hear a lot of people talk about this. I felt so cut off from everyone that I could just drink a lot, and I was socially fluid. So you can mimic these things, and that's not just, this can happen with all kinds of intimacy. So you might be you get into a romantic relationship, and you just oh, I'm intimate here. And then you just bite down on it super hard, and everything is being cut off. So it's very natural to human consciousness to associate intimacy with some kind of expulsion. So my favorite example is like if you go to a movie, like an action movie, at the end there's a couple people and they're kissing or they're laughing together, and there's someone who's like dying at the bottom of a cliff. And likewise, if you look at the structure of Shakespeare plays, all the comedies, the structure is, at the end, the good people will be together, and the people who are to be expelled will be expelled, killed, or banished. That's the basic, and that's a basic structure for narrative in Western culture, but actually you can see it in lots of other cultures, stories from all over the world. So the idea that intimacy has to come at the expense of someone being expelled is very deep. So as you develop intimacies, I encourage you to look and realize, oh, like, am I getting really into this spiritual community and it's really great, but we like to talk crap about the other people? Right? What is that? Can you find a way to not do that expulsion and keep expanding the sphere of intimacy? That kind of went totally off your question, but whatever. Sorry. Yeah.
Question about just mindfulness and intimacy in the workplace, because it's interesting for me because I work in a library, but I'm someone who doesn't like reading or watching movies or anything. It's interesting I'm there. So, you know, some of the things I do to help me when I'm there is just kind of work slower, just kind of stay in the now as I'm working. But with my coworkers, I felt the need to kind of get to know them better, just for myself to help my day, some kind of emotional connection with my coworkers, just to help me get through the day. Just doing my work slowly by myself and carefully, mindfully wasn't enough to make me like doing the job. I felt I need to connect with my coworkers, so I find myself at times just asking them about, you know, what book are you reading now?
Mm-hmm.
And just talking. I'm not really interested, but in some way I'm starting to get interested because they're telling me more about the story and I'm learning more about what they're reading. And it's been kind of really, I have a lot of social anxiety, so it's, I don't naturally trying to be more quiet. But it's been a real beautiful thing for me, just trying to reach out to my coworkers and just anything I can talk to them about and just get to know them. And so this talk really touched me because it really reinforced kind of how I've been feeling at work and just trying to, you know, connect with these people because they're very introverted people like me. So it's I just wanted to thank you for the talk because it really just helped me understand that, you know, what I'm trying to do at work is a good thing. You know, I'm trying to
Yeah.
some group energy and
Yeah, that sounds good. It sounds good, but it is also, you know, sometimes you'd be like, I want to connect with you, and the way you want to connect with a person, they're like, yeah, I don't really want to connect with you that way.
Right.
And then it's like, that's okay.
Right,
We're
yeah.
different. So, you know, you can reach out, but then it's always reciprocal, you know, so that's beautiful. Yeah. Making a space for connection is good. How about we do one more, and then we'll bust up this party.
Okay, could you talk a little bit about intimacy between humans and animals?
Well, I mean, people experience it profoundly. You know, I know people who their strongest bonds of relationship are to animals and not to people. So it's just a real thing. And all the things. So intimacy, like I'm talking about intimacy in the sense of recognizing our interdependence, which is like very broad. But most times we start to experience intimacy, not only does it have the expulsion component, but it has the neurotic component. So you really love someone and it's like, great, you feel really close, but all your weirdest stuff is gonna come up in that relationship too. So we can see in our relationship with animals that happens. It's beautiful to build bonds with them, to recognize that we're sharing this planet with them and they have a full range of emotion and reality of their life that needs to be respected. So I recommend it. And I'll just say, I recommend not eating them. I don't think they like to be eaten. No one likes it when I say that, but that's okay. The vegetarians like it. You can do whatever you want. I'm just throwing ideas out here, everybody. Don't eat people either. That's not nice. So, It's been wonderful to have some time with you this evening, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to practice with you, and I wish that I could hear about how you're doing, your intimacies. So come to the retreat tomorrow. We can not talk about it. But we can be together. Being together in silence is beautiful. Anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you.